the interest in hearing from the public and the material about conflicts of interest. But those still stand for this open hearing. We'll continue with speakers in the list we have. There'll be some movement around as we're waiting for Representative Watson, but we'll just carry on. I will just reiterate to the members of the committee, in anticipation of management of our interests tomorrow, I would like to keep the speakers to 7 minutes. If there is any time left in their 7 minutes, then we can have some questions. I'd like those questions to be about the material the speaker presented, not to introduce new topics beyond which they already spoke about. So if you have questions about what the speaker presented, please keep your questions to that. If there's no time left, we won't have time for questioning that particular speaker. But if at the end of the day, you and before the breaks, if you've written down to yourself someone you really want to question, most of the speakers will still be in the audience. If we have time, we may be able to come back to them and ask them questions. If not, we'll have to forgo those questions. If you do have a question, I ask you to do the following. Just hit your light on your mic so it goes on, or catch the eye of myself or Darrell Lyons. And once we see you can turn your light back off, that way we'll keep a list of who has questions. We'll follow the same procedure tomorrow afternoon when we get into discussion, because there's a lot of us here, and to make sure everybody gets the chance to speak. Does everybody understand the procedures? Any questions for me from the committee members this afternoon? If not, then we'll proceed with the first speaker, who will be Dr. Paul Gilbert. Is Dr. Gilbert here?
Thank you, everyone. As far as financial interests are concerned, unfortunately, I don't have any. I had to pay my way down myself. My name is Dr. Paul Gilbert, and the title of my little talk is Amalgam. It no longer has benefits that are worth the risks. This will be a little easier. Thank you. I have been practicing dentistry for more than 40 years. I've been a member of the American Dental Association since I started practicing in 1962, and have remained a member in spite of the ADA's support of the use of mercury in dentistry. I am now a lifetime member of the ADA, a distinction that I suspect the ADA will regret having conferred on me. Using mercury never made any sense to me because mercury is a heavy metal, and heavy metals, which also include lead, cadmium, and arsenic, are all highly toxic to living organisms, including humans. In the late 1970s, I found out that a few very progressive dentists were measuring significant amounts of mercury vapor coming off patients' fillings using a sophisticated measuring device called the Jerome analyzer. This contradicted the ADA's long-held position that amalgam mercury fillings are stable and do not emit mercury vapor. The Jerome analyzer was created specifically for OSHA to measure the mercury in the air of a manufacturing facility that stored or used mercury for some product or products. It measures the mercury in the air of a person's mouth with mercury fillings just as accurately and readily as it does in the air of a factory. It could even be used to measure the mercury levels in a dental school, but I am not aware that OSHA has ever done this. I really didn't fully understand then the simplicity of the concept that mercury is a deadly poison, or the complexity of symptoms that mercury creates as a poison. But I did have the common sense to realize that if patients were actually being exposed to mercury from their fillings, then it was time to stop using this dental filling material. This was more than 25 years ago. So I discarded all my dental equipment for placing amalgam mercury fillings and totally stopped implanting it in patients' teeth. I was now a mercury-free dentist, although I didn't see it that way back then, especially since I made this decision based only at that time on common sense and intuition. Fortunately, there were other open-minded dentists then, including a very astute dentist in Canada, Dr. Murray Vimy. Dr. Vimy realized that exposing patients to mercury didn't necessarily mean that they were absorbing it into their bodies. If they weren't, then it couldn't be a poison, at least from amalgam fillings. So he decided to scientifically find the answer to this question. At a research facility of the medical school at the University of Calgary in Canada, he, along with other researchers, created a seminal piece of animal research which proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that mercury in dental fillings is absorbed into the bodies of mammals. First, he placed amalgam fillings in sheep and then in monkeys, with both studies clearly demonstrating the spread of the mercury from the fillings into various organs and tissues. The results, which were published in the most distinguished scientific journal in the world, were astonishing and irrefutable because he cleverly used a radioactive isotope of mercury to track the mercury from the fillings. Using a man-made radioactive isotope of mercury, which doesn't exist in nature, made it impossible for the mercury he tracked to come from any source other than the fillings. It couldn't come from fish or water or the atmosphere or food. Dr. Vimy actually had the audacity to assume that the ADA, American Dental Association, an organization that claims to make its professional decisions based on science, would have an open mind and would at least start a dialogue with him about this research. Instead, his extremely credible sheep research was severely attacked and criticized by the ADA, presumably because it discredited the ADA's long-held position that amalgam is safe and stable. It was a sign of things to come. Ironically, when the study was repeated in monkeys, to lie to rest any concerns that sheep are just too different to draw any valid conclusions that could be applied to humans, the ADA ignored the monkey research, even though the results were very similar to the sheep research. Since then, a growing and still growing worldwide collection of research articles collectively condemning mercury in all its forms and in all its uses, including amalgam fillings, has been published mostly by non-dental researchers in non-dental peer-reviewed publications for anyone, including the ADA and the FDA, to study. Another particular area of interest to me, and I assume should be of interest to both the ADA and the FDA, is the scientific validity of the concept that mercury has no known level below which it can be shown to be a non-poison. Mercury is the most harmful poison of all the heavy metals, and its toxicity does not decrease with smaller exposures. With smaller exposures, all that happens is that the poison effect becomes more and more subclinical. It never goes away. This is known in scientific circles as a NOEL, or no observable effect level. The NOEL for mercury is 0 because mercury can be scientifically shown to be a poison in any amount, no matter how minuscule, as the ADA likes to say, the amount is. The centuries-old and outdated concept that the dose makes the poison has no scientific validity with mercury. This is likely true for all the heavy metals. Meanwhile, I continued to learn how to practice general restorative dentistry, using mainly the new composite filling materials. They weren't very good then, and the dental schools, whose curricula are directly imposed by the ADA's Committee on Accreditation, pretty much refused for many years to teach students how to use white fillings. Instead, the driving force came from manufacturers of dental materials, who didn't give a hoot about mercury, but they did recognize the huge aesthetic improvement with white filling materials and the marketing potential that these composite filling materials offered. They kept on developing this filling material of the future until composites became durable, functional, strong, essentially non-poisons, and economically in the same ballpark as amalgam mercury fillings. I know that from my own personal experience with composites for more than 25 years of general, clinical, private practice dentistry. Yes, they are harder to place in patients, which just makes any dentist who learns how to use composites well a better dentist. I also noticed that I was attracting relatively young patients, many in their 30s, who were afflicted by all sorts of neurological diseases and disorders, such as fibromyalgia, Parkinson's, MS, lupus.
Dr. Gilbert, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Thank you for your testimony. Dr. Kennedy?
See if we can get there. Is this Good afternoon. I'm Dr. David Kennedy, and I have no financial interest in mercury amalgams. And this issue, it would probably save me quite a bit of money because I came here at my own expense and actually helped some other people come. I have before you given you a nice printout because we have so limited time. We can't possibly cover what 20 years of research has accomplished. But I will briefly summarize for you what the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology has focused on for the last 20 years. Back in the 1980s, the question was, is there exposure and intake and body burden? This has been demonstrated for over 70 years. Alfred Stock first demonstrated mercury vapor was coming off in 1926. It took another 28 years for the NIDR and the ADA to acknowledge mercury is coming off. Germany reviewed this in detail. You have a copy of the German peer-reviewed, oh, I guess not. Anyway, James Mozzi, a metallurgist, talked at the meeting in Offenhausen in 1994. He took an electron micrograph of a 25-year-old set dental of amalgam that he touched in 4 places with an oscillotron that pushed 1 pound per square inch. That's a lot less than you hit with your teeth. Do you see the droplets of mercury on the surface of a 25-year-old filling? That you heard this morning it was a stable alloy, then there's no free mercury. Well, that's not true, and that hasn't been true for 150 years. Rodney Mackert talked to the World Health Organization in 1990, and they determined that his estimate of dose was too low, and it did not fit the empirical data. They estimated the daily dose at 17 micrograms. You heard Richard Candidate. That exceeds Richard Candidate's minimum risk level. So pay attention. We've got lots of numbers here. Intake, mercury fillings in sheep, you just heard about that. You put them in monkeys, you heard about that. Then you probably didn't hear about the autopsies of humans. And they measured mercury in humans, and they showed that the amount of mercury in humans is proportional to the number of fillings in their teeth. No other factor. And they had good controls. And they said overall the results were better than neutron activation analysis by a 4-fold, and the amount of mercury in their brains was proportional to the number of fillings in their teeth. Not the fish they eat. So we've accomplished 1, 2, 3. Exposure, intake, body burden. Let's go on. How about pathophysiology? Maternal fetal transfer into the vulnerable subsets. Okay, fine. Mercury from dental fillings impairs sheep kidneys. In 30 days, we had a 60% drop in the kidney's ability to clear inulin. We did not find the same thing in sheep. In monkeys. And we didn't know until they published the terribly unethical Cassiopeia mercury exposure study that it happens in children. Here's a study of children where they put 2 fillings in to start with, and you can see they doubled the amount of mercury coming out of the child's urine, and about 1 filling more a year. What happened is at 2 years, the mercury peaked and then began to decline. So at the end of 7 years, there's no statistical significant difference in the urinary mercury levels. This group is relying entirely upon urinary mercury levels to discredit the science showing mercury from fillings is harmful. This study alone shows that you've damaged that child's kidney exactly like we damaged the sheep's kidney. Pathophysiology. Ann Summers couldn't afford to come here on her own, but she's shown in repeated studies, including her PhD thesis, and now she's a professor in multiple studies, that when you put mercury fillings in the teeth, you select for antibiotic-resistant organisms. You have that paper before you. Dr. Fickholm, you heard this morning, couldn't find any mercury in the animals that he put mercury fillings in. Here's a guy putting mercury fillings in rats and finds it in the fetuses. I think there might be a flaw in having a dental student do an experiment. Dr. Drash found it in the human fetuses. We showed in animals that it happens. It goes from the animal into the fetus. And when you put them in, every conceivable tissue in that fetus goes up. But just like humans, the fetal blood is almost twice as high as the maternal blood. So when you do a risk assessment, you can't use the mother's blood level. You've got to use cord blood. 1 out of 8 children in the United States are born today with a blood level of mercury that will cause neurological impairment. Where do you think it's coming from? They look to the ocean. Oh, maybe it's the fish. They look to the sky. It might be the air. We've counted the fillings. It's the fillings. Get over it. And it also comes out in the milk. The fetuses, the sheep, continue to be exposed to the maternal transfer of mercury from her teeth into the milk. There are vulnerable subsets. Nobody's talked about that. There's a genetic subset, they're non-excretors, and they have extremely low levels of mercury in their urine, their fingernails, and their hair. That's one of the studies that was supposedly discredited by the FDA white paper that we showed in children that were autistic. They have almost no mercury in their hair, regardless of the number of fillings in the mother's teeth. In the controls, the amount of mercury in the baby's hair was proportional to the number of fillings in the mother's teeth. That should be of concern to everyone that wants to have healthy children. There's another subset, which is a porphyrin formation. So now we got two subsets and a gene that represents probably less than 5% of the population. What epidemiologist in this room thinks you can find a subset of the population when you have two genetic subsets with an epidemiology study? You're not going to find it. So they were confused today. You've asked over and over, what's going on? What's the dose? Nobody seems to be able to answer your questions. Maybe you have the wrong people talking to you. Is there pathophysiology? Yes. Maternal fetal transfer? Yes. Vulnerable subsets? Yes. And the sad news is there's no evidence of benefit. You hear over and over the risks outweigh the benefit, or the benefits outweigh the risk, blah, blah, blah. In order to put the filling in the tooth, you got to drill away 75% of the strength of that tooth. Do you know what happens then? It breaks, and then you need a crown or a root canal, and it has to be extracted. Factor that cost in. Don't tell me the cost of a piece of filling material. Tell me the cost of the damage. Amalgam is also linked to gum disease. When you put a mercury filling in the tooth, you lose 1 millimeter of bone around your tooth. You want to do that? That's what you're doing. 66% of tooth extraction is because of gum disease. You haven't even addressed that. That's a proven consequence of mercury in your teeth. And then there's the lichen planus. They say it's an allergic reaction. It's also called a precancerous lesion. 66% of them resolve if you remove the fillings. And then the cost of neurological impairment. These people misunderstood the source of the mercury. They called it methyl mercury. That Nylander and Eggleston, I had to go too fast. Where's my time?
Sorry to interrupt you. Thanks for your testimony.
Well, thank you.
Dr. Huggins. My apologies.
Having a hard time getting into the 20th century. We'll try to play the buttons here. Right, this is an explanation basically of the graph that I like to use in determining the changes that have occurred in, we've got about 200,000 chemistries over a period of 38 years. Most of the changes that are shown here occurred within 6 to 10 days. What we're trying to do is show that there's a stability point. Normal range, as shown on the bottom of this, covers by definition 95.56% of the population. But over a period of time, the highs come down, the lows come up upon dental intervention, and there appears a stability point. The stability point is an area which doesn't move a whole lot, and it is the area in which you find most people who do not have disease. 10 years ago, the Adolph Coors Foundation sponsored a study on 30 patients with at least 3 amalgams and no more than 11. These people had no other dental restorative materials in their mouth, no nutrition or any other intervention was performed. Chemistries are run, amalgams removed, composites placed, duplicate chemistries were replaced. A lot of changes were noted. The most unexpected change was in cholesterol. Here you can see that the higher cholesterol levels dropped some over 40 to 50 milligrams %. Expanding this into a non-Coors study, we found in a study of people with excess of 250 milligrams that the drops were 80 to 100 milligrams % in 6 days after amalgam removal without any drug intervention. Hemoglobin has 4 binding sites into which oxygen can attach. Mercury has a high affinity for these sites. Should 2 sites be saturated with mercury, the total carrying capacity for oxygen drops 50%. It was curious that sequential removal of amalgam frequently produced a drop in red cell count, hemoglobin, and hematocrit. This was accompanied by a simultaneous increase in urinary excretion of mercury. We expected red cell values to be reflected in an increase in fatigue. However, the patients reported a dramatic increase in energy. Now, where did this come from? A study of the venous oxyhemoglobin, or the actual oxygen-carrying saturation, showed the answer. Where huffing and puffing might increase oxyhemoglobin 1%, dental intervention produced an average increase in oxygen of 22.5% with some values reaching as much as 40% increase in oxygen. Where does hemoglobin come from? From porphyrins in the bloodstream. Porphyrins develop into heme, from there into hemoglobin, and by another pathway into ATP. If there is a toxic blockage somewhere, porphyrins are excreted in the urine. The presence of toxicity is sometimes assessed by measuring the amount of porphyrins in the urine. This is a slide of a male that has never had amalgam in his mouth. The test shows only one porphyrin, the 4-carboxy, and the total was 12 micrograms. This porphyrin test is on a wheelchair-bound multiple sclerosis patient, showing the presence of 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 carboxy porphyrins with a total of 2,400 micrograms in the urine. 10 days after dental intervention, that means getting rid of the amalgam and other things, the level had dropped to 200 micrograms. This means that far more energy was available for normal biochemical reactions and less energy was literally going down the toilet. Is there any wonder that the patient was able to get out of the wheelchair and take a few steps unaided? Looking further into multiple sclerosis, these spinal tap results show multiple unusual proteins in the spinal fluid. Albumin, which is present at about 55 kilodaltons, is the only protein that should be there. The next slide looks very similar because on the right side of the test, the same patient, you find only albumin. 4 days after dental intervention, all 4 patients physically improved and all 4 demonstrated a total disappearance of the unusual proteins. Only albumin remained. Were these the oligoclonal globulins that disappeared? Is there a mechanism that could link mercury to an autoimmune response similar to that in MS? The major histocompatibility complex, MHC, on a cell's surface signals to the immune system whether a cell is self or non-self. Non-self or abnormal cells are flagged for destruction. Should an atom of mercury bind to a sulfur binding site on the cell surface, the MHC is altered such that the normal self cell will be seen as non-self or abnormal and be scheduled for destruction. Thus the origin of autoimmune disease. I'll cut this one briefly. Those of you who have experience in immunology would recognize lymphocyte viability. And you notice after 4 days exposure to the amount of mercury that you would have in 6 fillings, the lymphocyte viability dropped from 100%, 92% to 21%. This suggests that the differential slide of the CBC is not always indicative of immune competence. This slide demonstrates normal DNA contains a single spike of chromosome numbers, and more than one, by definition, is malignant. This patient showed abnormal physiological changes immediately after the placement of dental materials. Serious immune deficit was found, but surprisingly, a malignant DNA was also found. Within 2 months, after dental intervention, the malignancy was changed to non-malignant. The conclusion is objective laboratory evidence confirms that adverse effects of mercury on biochemistry are amenable to dental interventions. Clean our DNA, ban amalgam. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Dr. Huggins, for your testimony. Our next speaker will be Representative Watson. And there are no time limits on your presentation. Thank you for speaking to us. If you could turn your mic on, please, which would just be, thank you.
I certainly want to thank the chairman and the members of the 2-part panel assembled here today, plus the Associate Commissioner Luther and the FDA staff for allowing me a chance to present testimony to the FDA on the issue of dental amalgam. I am Congresswoman Diane Watson, representing the 33rd Congressional District in Los Angeles, Culver City, and that includes Hollywood as well. Prior to my current tenure in the House of Representatives, I served for 20 years in the California State Senate, and I chaired the Health and Human Services Committee for 17 years. And I have for many, many decades been an advocate for banning the use of dental amalgam in the field of dentistry. And in my capacity as the chairperson of the Health and Human Services Committee, I had to educate my colleagues. And so I wrote legislation into law that requires dentists in the state of California to provide their patients with a fact sheet listing, was that Freudian? Anyway, with a fact sheet listing the risk of mercury amalgam fillings, better known as silver fillings. It was called the Watson Law, and it passed the legislature in 1992. However, it took another 12 years for the Dental Board of California to finally be convinced of the wisdom of complying with the law. I had to go through 2 governors. And finally, when I got the right governor in, the first thing he did was to disband the board at the time, recompose it, and it wasn't until about 2 years ago that we finally got a brochure that would inform the patients what was in their fillings. I am also the co-author of H.R. 4011, and that is the Mercury in Dental Fillings Disclosure and Prevention Act, which prohibits, after 2008, the introduction into interstate commerce of mercury intended to be used in dental fillings. In October of 2003, Washington, D.C.'s Fire Department and Hazmat Unit responded to a mercury spill at Ballou High School. A student had obtained 250 milliliters, approximately 8 ounces, of liquid elemental mercury from the high school's science laboratory and sold some of it to students. Don't know what that was all about. But the hazmat team did not respond in time to contain the spill. So Ballou High School closed its door for 35 days, and EPA and hazmat teams eventually tested over 200 homes for mercury contamination. Total cost of the cleanup was estimated to have been in the range of $1.5 million. And last year, a student at Cardozo High School, also located in Washington, D.C., removed a vial of mercury from the chemistry lab and disposed of it improperly. Consequently, school officials closed the school for over a month in order to contain and clean up the contamination. The cleanup cost ran into the multiples of tens of thousands, which did not include the sizable additional cost of relocating a whole student body to another site. Now, the 2 mercury contaminations of D.C. public schools dramatically illustrate that mercury is one of the most toxic substances known to man. Even a small amount of mercury exposure and contamination can have catastrophic consequences and require massive and expensive clean-up efforts. To date, the FDA has banned mercury in disinfectants and thermometers, warned against mercury in certain foods, and prohibited the use of mercury in all veterinary products. The UK prohibits, the United Kingdom prohibits the use of mercury silver fillings for pregnant women, and the Scandinavian countries are phasing out its use altogether. Canada is also limiting the use of mercury fillings. And despite the growing awareness among school administrators, among medical experts, scientists, government officials around the world, and the general public, in spite of the awareness of the dangers of human exposure to a very small amount of mercury, the U.S. federal government continues to allow the unregulated use of mercury silver fillings in dentistry. The FDA, the agency in charge of regulating mercury fillings, is permitting the sale of a product that has not been proven safe and has not been classified as the law requires. It continues to allow the sale and the use of a mercury filling without disclosing to the patients or the American people that mercury vapor is released during the entire life of the dental filling, and that amalgam fillings contain 50% mercury, one of the most dangerous neurotoxins known. And concerns about the FDA's failure to address properly a mercury-based product implanted just inches from a person's, and in many cases a child's brain, have been raised by Senator Easy and Senator Kennedy in letters that have been sent to Acting Commissioner von Eschenbach, by Senator Hatch in a letter to former Commissioner Crawford, and by Senator Lautenberg in a letter to NIH Director Zahuni. Congressman Burton, the former chairman of the Government Reform Committee, and myself, we teamed up to hold 3 hearings addressing mercury amalgam. Congressional concern clearly reaches across party lines, but congressional legislation is not only what is needed, it's time for the FDA to treat mercury amalgam as it has treated many other mercury-containing products. And it has already banned the use of mercury, as I said, in disinfectants, also in veterinary medicines, and warns pregnant women and parents of young children to stay away from fish with mercury. Why would we want to embed anything that had any amount of mercury in a child's mouth? It is now time for the FDA to take the next logical step with respect to mercury amalgams. Let's take away the risk. If we know that mercury is a neurotoxin, why allow it to be embedded in someone's mouth? At least give them a choice and give them the knowledge to make a rational and reasonable choice. So the FDA's silence on mercury amalgam stands in contrast to other federal agencies. The Centers for Disease Control in 2005 called amalgam a source of major exposure to mercury, and the U.S. Public Health Services warned in 1999 that mercury amalgam is one of the 2 largest sources of mercury exposure. It should there come as no surprise that dental officers are one of the prime sources of mercury pollution in our environment. In my discussions with doctors of dentistry, it is estimated that nearly or roughly 5 dental offices in higher traffic urban areas use the equivalent of 250 milliliters of mercury each year, the same amount illicitly taken from Ballou High School in the processing of dental amalgam material. In each urban community, there are hundreds of dentists who use mercury fillings. And in my own area, I border on the coastline, Santa Monica and Venice in California, and we're finding that the fish are coming up with a high level of mercury. And we're warning not to eat fish along the western coast, at least that segment. And we find our plants that take care and process our waste are dumping the waste from dental offices in the ocean waters along the coast. It is also my understanding that due to the toxicity of mercury, dentists are instructed not to touch the amalgam before putting it into the patient's mouth. They're also instructed to change their clothes before leaving the office and not to place carpet on the floors of the actual part of the office where they're doing the fillings. Clearly, the amount of mercury used in dental offices around the nation dwarfs the mercury spill that happened at Ballou High School. The potential for accidental spills and contamination in dental offices is enormous. So the term dental filling used by the profession is misleading and inaccurate, since dental amalgam contains 50% mercury. A 2006 Zogby poll found that 24% of Americans could identify the major component of amalgam. When informed that mercury is used in dental amalgam, only over 90% of the respondents said that consumers should be entitled to know that non-toxic alternatives are available. And a subgroup of those polled were asked if they believe amalgam should be legal or illegal, and by a ratio of 7-to-1, they said it should be banned. So with fewer than 1 in 4 Americans knowing that amalgam contains significant amounts of mercury, and with over 3 in 4 Americans seeing a dentist, it is clear that the dental profession is failing to disclose a fact that would be of extreme importance to most consumers if they were only made aware of it. When the private sector fails to disclose a salient fact, then it is the duty of the FDA to act and to inform the American public. 2 ironic tragedies exist with the ongoing use of mercury. First, mercury amalgams are completely unnecessary. Most dentists will tell you that any cavity in a child or an adult can be filled with non-mercury alternatives. Second, the demographics of those who receive mercury fillings are changing. Today, a growing number of middle-class adults do not receive mercury fillings. Increasingly, mercury fillings are used on children because it's easier, it's quicker, and it's cheaper to use them, and lower income groups. That children and low-income pregnant women are more often exposed to mercury amalgams than any other group should be a cause of alarm for FDA. So I must also note that the issue of dental amalgam is of growing importance in my own African American health community. Both the NAACP and the National Black Caucus of state legislators have endorsed legislation to protect children and pregnant women from mercury fillings. And sadly, the National Dental Association is in opposition to my bill. And they've come to my office and they have said to me, look, our people don't like to go to the dentist. Well, who likes to go to the dentist? But they don't like to come. So we give them these fillings because they're cheaper and they're quicker. That is no excuse for allowing toxics. I don't care how well embedded they are in the compound into someone's mouth. And so we're working on them. As I said, it's all a matter of educating. The privilege sanctuary for mercury amalgam must end. And the fact of the matter is that it is, I hope, dying of natural causes. And if I can use an imperfect metaphor, because many dentists are beginning to use alternatives, they understand. But we cannot afford the luxury of allowing dental amalgam to succumb to a slow death. Its toxicity to humans and the environment requires us to act now. The FDA must therefore move ahead in the 5 following areas. Number 1, public awareness. The FDA must immediately take the simple step of insisting that the public be told in advance of placement that amalgam is 50% mercury, that it constitutes an exposure to a neurotoxin, and that alternative fillings are available and they can be less expensive than most would imagine. I have always believed that the most important factor in improving public health is greater public awareness and education. That is simple, but I believe very important messages of California's Watson's Law must get out. The second thing, environmental impact. The FDA has a legal duty to conduct an environmental impact study of dental amalgam, which it has not done yet, before it classifies the material. So let's look even at the laboratories that manufacture mercury and how they transport it to their sources. So the second issue is the environmental impact. The third issue, proof of safety. Makers of amalgam, like any device containing a dangerous substance, should have the burden of proving it is safe. The burden should be on them. In the case of the encapsulated dental amalgam, however, amalgam manufacturers have neither sought nor been provided pre-market approval of their product. There is no excuse for a product that contains one of the most potent neurotoxins known to man to be distributed to the public without prior approval from the Federal Drug Administration. Number 4, children and pregnant women. 10 years ago, Canada directed its dentists to cease placing mercury fillings in the teeth of children, pregnant women, and persons with kidney disease. Those who have mercury hypersensitivity or who have braces. And it's well past the time for the FDA to take this sensible and important step to ensure the health and welfare of the people in our nation. So, in closing, I do want to commend the FDA for holding what I consider this essential and important hearing. But hearings alone are not the answer. It is now time for the FDA to address thoroughly and completely the environmental impact of mercury fillings, require proof of safety, and be honest with the American people about the fact that silver fillings contain a significant amount of mercury that can be dangerous to the health of everyone. And remember, regardless how well contained that mercury is, it still gives off vapors. The vapors are working on the system, particularly in the T-zone, constantly. When you have a cracked tooth, and you know children are always cracking their tooth, they'll take a hard ball, candy, bite on it, cracked tooth. That vapor escapes. And so we should test all of our children to see if the fumes are there, and they will be if there's mercury in the fillings. So there's so many things that need to be done, and I task our federal bureau, the FDA, with doing what's in its authority to do to prove that it is safe. And depending on these other studies, unless we get out and do our own study, it's a secondhand information. So in closing now, I thank all of you for listening, and I would hope that you would join with me in getting the FDA to move on mercury amalgams. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Congresswoman Watson. Committee appreciates you giving your testimony. We'll move on to the next, Ms. Sarah Moore-Hines.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm a psychotherapist in Pennsylvania, a nationally certified counselor. I've worked for over 25 years with a wide variety of adults, children, couples, and families. I've served on 2 mental health boards advocating for professional standards and licensure for professional counselors and marriage and family therapists. 10 years ago, my life was good. Both personally and professionally, I was happy. I worked full-time in private practice and in excellent health. I was frequently engaged in long walks, bike rides, and dance classes. My family life was positive and the future looked promising. Who would have suspected that a few well-intended visits to the dentist would have resulted in 10 years of unexpected, devastating damage to my health? In the summer of 1996, a local dentist repaired 3 to 4 silver mercury amalgam fillings, and I felt good that I'd caught up on some long-needed dental work. Within 1 to 2 months, my energy began to deteriorate for no apparent reason. Additionally, I began to experience frequent viral-like symptoms mimicking early stages of the flu. A top-notch Harvard MD did an extensive battery of blood tests that indicated a good bill of health. I have since learned that blood tests do not effectively test mercury levels. He stated that he had no idea what was happening to me. Over the next 4 years, my energy worsened into exhaustive chronic fatigue, and after 8 hours of sleep even, I had great difficulty getting out of bed in the morning and getting through my workday. Eventually, I could no longer walk around the block. I often felt like I had a low-grade fever and a systemic infection. Increasingly, I came down with frequent colds and illnesses and began to cancel personal engagements, as well as professional appointments, including my own counseling clients, with little advance notice. When I did get the flu, I was so sick I wondered if I would survive. I noticed that I didn't have my usual emotional resistance and then started experiencing bouts of mild and occasionally moderate depression. I sometimes became very anxious or frustrated. Both feelings felt hard to contain. quite unlike my usual calm and understanding personality style. It became difficult to control worrying, and clearly something was having a powerful and increasingly effect on my body and nervous system. Eventually, it became a challenge to focus and concentrate. I became the most worried when my memory began to decline, and I was no longer able to easily do checkbook calculations. For an extended period of time, my sexual libido declined, and my hair fell out. Other problems emerged, including thyroid and adrenal damage, tachycardia, chest pains, chronic urinary tract infections, etc. In 2000, a holistic ND who was trained in heavy metal testing performed a DMPS urine challenge test that indicated that I had extremely high level of mercury in my body. Because my immune system had been so damaged from the mercury, it took almost a year for a holistic dentist to safely remove each amalgam one by one separately. I also discovered that the mercury from 2 to 3 amalgam fillings had migrated into my jawbone, requiring specialized cavitation surgery. I had trusted that amalgams were safe. By 2001, all the amalgams had been replaced with white composite fillings, and over the next 5 years, I engaged in a comprehensive and challenging medical protocol of mercury detoxification, consulting with several MDs who were knowledgeable in this area. In order to function and effectively heal, I needed to take intermittent injections as well as numerous daily supplements for the purpose of mercury detox, nutritional, and endocrine support. Healing has occurred, but slowly, with disappointing setbacks and financial burden. The real cost was the cost to my health. 2 additional DMPS tests in 04 and 05 indicated the good news of a gradual decrease of the mercury level of my body. I have fought hard to restore my health. And in the last year, my health has significantly improved. Most of the mercury toxicity symptoms have finally disappeared or gradually decreased in intensity. My energy is better. I can work consistently again, and recently I've been able to walk considerable distances and occasionally bike. This has been a joy. I continue daily healing efforts in the hope that someday I will feel completely normal and whole again, including not needing thyroid medication or multiple supplements to get through my day. The truth is that these years of devastation to my health were not necessary and should not have happened. So I ask, how can other people be protected from the internal assault of this powerfully toxic heavy metal amalgam that can damage the bodies and lives of any of us? I'd like to suggest that there is no effective way of predicting who will get sick or who may be, quote, hypersensitive, unquote. It's a gamble. I believe that the issue of mercury amalgam is a significant consumer protection and public safety issue. As a heartfelt request, I ask this FDA Public Hearing Board and the rest of the panelists to please listen to and heed the truths of this amalgam matter, to take appropriate steps to protect consumers from being exposed to amalgam, to take steps regarding informed consent, to educate consumers, including requiring dentists to inform their patients about the potential health dangers, so that patients have the opportunity to make informed choices for themselves and their families. Change the phrase silver fillings. It hides the fact that the primary component of amalgam is mercury. It would be more appropriate and in the interest of consumers to call them mercury fillings. Classify amalgam so that consumers understand that it contains approximately 50% toxic mercury. Set up an independent committee to review relevant and objective research on amalgam. Abolish amalgam mercury fillings in the United States as soon as possible. We've heard from Representative Watson. She's reminded us about the FDA having the wisdom to condemn the use of mercury in veterinary products. Certainly, we as human beings, including our children, should enjoy at least the same protection as afforded our pets. There are safe, available alternatives to amalgam that truly serve our citizens well. In conclusion, in every walk of life and every profession, I do believe there are certain crucial times when there is a need for leaders to emerge. Regarding the issue of mercury amalgam, now is that time for those who can and will to take informed, responsible action. Now is the time to resist the pressures of vested interests, to take the higher ground, to act wisely and courageously, and to do so will serve and deeply benefit tens of millions of Americans across our nation. And I would just like to add that the World Health Organization, it's my understanding that according to the World Health Organization, amalgam dental fillings are the primary source of mercury exposure. And my own dentist herself, who is a female dentist, experienced many of the symptoms that were similar to mine in terms of mercury amalgam, including depression. Many of her staff experienced similar symptoms, including infertility, and her own son, who had never had any amalgams put in his mouth, experienced some similar symptoms. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you. Thank you. Our next speaker is Dr. Bruce Hutchinson.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Bruce Hutchison. I'm a practicing dentist in Centerville, Virginia, about 50 minutes drive from here, so no one paid my way. I have no financial interests, and I'll be driving home when I'm done. I'm not a scientist. I'm a practicing dentist. I'm the guy you go to when you need a filling. Okay, I'm here to represent many of my colleagues who go out there, do the work day after day, do the best we can with the materials we have and with the knowledge that we have, with the continuing education that we have available to us. I think the vast majority of us do the very best we can and stay current with the facts and the topics as best we can. When I began doing dentistry 26 years ago, amalgam was by far the choice of filling material to be used on any posterior or back tooth. In fact, it's really the only option we had 26 years ago, other than going to a crown or a gold inlay or a gold onlay, which again is quite a difference in cost, as you can imagine. Today, I do very few amalgam restorations, mostly because patients don't want them. They're ugly, they're black, they're silver, patients don't like the way they look. They are aware of some controversy going on, although quite frankly, they don't understand mercury or lead or molybdenum or anything else. They think the fillings, the vast majority of patients think the fillings are made out of lead. They have no idea. But I still believe that mercury-based amalgam fillings have a place in dentistry. There are places where I find it to be invaluable and the only option that I think is doable in a certain situation. Now again, I place very few amalgams because the patients don't want them, but there are places where you cannot keep the tooth 100% dry. Any other filling material we have will fail. Amalgam will not. So again, we're at a point where is cost the only thing that matters, and I would say no, but my research, my reading, everything I hear from the FDA on down through other organizations says to me that amalgam is safe and effective and viable for patient usage. So why should I not use it? Excuse me. If for any reason I actually believed that amalgam was causing harm to my patients, I would stop using it immediately. And I think most dentists feel that way. We have an obligation to our patients, to the public, to do the best we can. Our patients trust us. They trust us to do what's right for them. And if I had a personal belief that it was bad for my patients, I frankly would not use it. But again, I think it's dying a slow death all on its own, just because of the public cry that there are other materials out there that for the most part can be used, that look better, that work better, and are available. But if you take amalgam away from the practicing dentist armamentarium, you really are doing a disservice to the public, I believe. Many times I have patients walk in the door that have fillings that are 40 and even 50 years old that are dental amalgam. And you know what? A lot of them are still just fine. I have yet to see any other restoration other than possibly a gold one that lasts 40 or 50 years. They just don't happen. And I guess that's really all I had to say. But once again, I want to stress that if you take it away from the dentist, I think you're doing the patients a disservice, because the only option in some of these cases is extremely more expensive, because we're not talking about a different kind of filling material. If it's a place we can't keep 100% dry, then we're going to have to go to something like a crown, which is, instead of $100 or $200 for a filling, is going to be more like $1,000 or $1,200. So it's a huge, huge difference. And I know Congresswoman Watson said it's not a big difference in cost. Well, it can be. It can be a huge difference in cost. And although we shouldn't measure everything by what it costs and value and so on, I think cost is important. It's important to every one of you when you do your shopping, and maybe it's not important to you when you're valuing your health care, but I have patients that it is important to. That it is important that they couldn't have a filling if they couldn't have the cheaper alternative. Thank you for your time. I think this is an issue that has been on the radar screen for years and years now, for decades, I would say. And the other thing I would add is that if this were a true danger to society, after 150 years of using these things, I really think someone would have figured it out by now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hutchinson. Dr. Wilson?
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Nairn Wilson. I represent the Academy of Operative Dentistry, which has paid my expenses to be here. I have no financial involvement in any respect in relation to dental amalgam. The Academy of Operative Dentistry is pleased to have the opportunity to participate in the present hearing. The purpose of the Academy is to promote excellence in operative dentistry, including all matters pertaining to the conservation and, where necessary, restoration of teeth. The Academy, founded in 1972, is a worldwide organisation with more than 1,200 members in 25 countries. The Academy is a non-profit making organisation of substantial international standing. I'm representing the Academy at this hearing as Chairman of the Academy's Research Committee and as a member of the Academy's Executive Council. I'm presently Dean and Head of the King's College London Dental Institute at Guy's King's College and St Thomas's Hospital in London. My credentials are set out in a brief resume attached to the written submission. While my interests, activities and expertise have given me a great deal of involvement and understanding of the dental amalgam issue, I think it is of relevance to point out that I spent more than 30 years in research with a main focus on tooth-coloured filling materials, in particular their clinical use, efficacy, and the teaching of these materials. Regarding dental amalgam, the Academy has the view that this alloy is safe, effective material for the restoration of teeth. Notwithstanding its long history, etc., which I understand and accept is not science justification itself, it is very clear that there are a small but significant number of people who do get adverse reaction, typically of a localized allergic nature. Available scientific information continues to reinforce the widely held, recognized safety and effectiveness of dental amalgam. The Academy endorses the World Health Organization, WHO, and World Dental Federation, FDI, consensus statement on dental amalgam of 1997, which, amongst other matters, considers dental amalgam restorations to be safe. This statement has recently been reaffirmed by 2 scientific reviews confirming the safety of the dental amalgam. These reviews, one by Clarkson, Magus and Mayer in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2003, and a second by Brownwell, Berendt and Brent in Toxicology Reviews in 2005. The conclusion of the Brownwell, Berendt and Brent et al. Study is considered to be of particular relevance to the present hearing, and it concludes with the following statement. Despite public controversy over the use of dental amalgam as a restorative material, this systematic evaluation of current peer-reviewed published studies did not reveal significant evidence to support a causal relationship between dental amalgam restorations and human health problems, with the exception of allergic reactions in some individuals. In making this statement, the authors acknowledge, notwithstanding existing knowledge and understanding, that research gaps still exist and well-designed studies that enroll sufficient numbers of subjects and controls are required to ultimately resolve the dental amalgam controversy. The Academy of Operative Dentistry also endorses the ADA, the American Dental Association's statement on dental amalgam, in which the ADA's Council on Scientific Affairs 1998 report on the scientific literature on dental amalgam is cited to have included, there currently appears to be no justification for discontinuing the use of dental amalgam. This view is echoed in the recent 2006 Council of European Dentists resolution on dental amalgam, which concludes by calling on European Union institutions to take full account of the scientific evidence in relation to dental amalgam and the worldwide consensus of the dental profession that dental amalgam should remain part of the dentist's armamentarium to best meet the needs of patients. In holding the view that dental amalgam is safe and effective, the Academy acknowledges, as stated in the WHO FDI consensus statement, there's a potential health risk to oral health personnel from mercury exposure if working conditions are not properly organised, and that mercury used in dentistry may contaminate the environment via the disposal of waste products from dental clinics. To these ends, the Academy fully endorses the application of proper mercury hygiene in dental application and the use of equipment to collect metallic waste generated during dental amalgam placement and removal procedures. Furthermore, the Academy acknowledges that an adverse reaction to dental amalgam may occasionally occur, and despite the rarity of such reactions, oral health personnel should continuously be alert to such a possibility, in particular in the management of patients with history of adverse reaction to any of the constituents of dental amalgam alloys. In its pursuit of excellence in operative dentistry, the Academy also fully supports the importance of continued monitoring of the safety and effectiveness of all dental restorative materials. The Academy is proud of its commitment to excellence in operative dentistry in the interests of in particular patients, and will continue to encourage and promote an evidence-based approach to clinical practice, including the rapidly expanding use of alternative restorative materials, typically at the expense of the use of dental amalgam. On the matter of dental amalgam, the Academy would urge the hearing to be influenced in its deliberation by the most robust of scientific information available, let alone the conclusions of the various national, international, and other organisations who have looked very carefully at the dental amalgam issue. The overwhelming consensus is that, with the exception of some rare patients with adverse reactions to dental amalgam and some of its constituents, the continuing use of dental amalgam does serve a purpose and is of benefit to many patients, and to them it is safe and effective. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Our next speaker will be Dr. Mayer. I may just say that I'm just going to give speakers a little tap at 1 minute. Many of you have written comments and don't see the light go from green to yellow, just to give you a little heads up that you're heading into the last minute, if you don't mind.
Just go easy on the tap. I startle easy. Hi, thanks for having me. I'm Dr. Vincent Mayer. I'm the president-elect of the Academy of General Dentistry, and I practiced general dentistry in Haddonfield, New Jersey for 25 years. The Academy did pay for my transportation and room and board. I am not anti-mercury. I am not pro-mercury. I am pro-choice. After all in all, in the end, it comes down to two people, the practicing dentist and the patient who places his or her trust in their dentist. Like the tens of thousands of my colleagues who place amalgams every day, I am not a research scientist. Instead, I rely on valid scientific articles presented in refereed journals such as that of the American Dental Association and the Academy of General Dentistry to make clinical judgments based on sound science. In addition, it is also important for the dental clinician to rely on credible entities such as the National Institutes of Health, the U.S. Public Health Service, the Food and Drug Administration, the World Health Organization, and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. These are home base. As a clinician, I have no choice but to look to these bodies for guidance. To deviate from the determinations made by these credible entities would be to turn my back on sound science and therefore place my patients in the vulnerable position of being the recipients of dental care that is being supported only by supposition. All of these credible institutions have validated the safety of dental amalgam time and time again over years of research. That is not to say that there should not be options. There's a retail clothing store in my area whose slogan goes, "An educated consumer is our best customer." Nothing could be more apropos when it comes to the relationship of a clinician and a patient in choosing a restorative material. Because while the scientific aspects of the safety of amalgam is the major consideration, in my world, it is also a consumer issue. Patients should have the right to make an educated decision as to the nature of any dental restorative material that is being placed into their bodies. I have placed amalgams in my immediate family members' mouths in the past, and I would not hesitate to do so in the future. If I had even the slightest concern that this material might place their health in jeopardy, I would simply choose another material. Understand there is always an alternative to amalgam. The problem is the alternative may not be as strong, may require more frequent replacement, or could cost much more. Case in point, many of my patients are senior citizens who've had crown and bridge restorations placed in the past. Often due to decreasing dexterity and dry mouth conditions, these people are more prone to recurrent dental decay around this crown and bridge work. Most of the time, due to the nature of these restorations, the recurrent decay is subgingival, that is below the gum line, where visibility and moisture control can be very challenging. Amalgam is ideally suited in repairing this type of recurrent decay. It performs better than any other direct restorative material when placed in a moist environment, and it can be contoured and finished with hand instruments. One could argue, why not replace the crown and bridge work, and that would be a valid clinical argument. Only with amalgam, we can do this for under $200. Replacing the crown and bridge work could potentially cost many thousands of dollars on these senior citizens, many of whom are on fixed incomes. In other instances, individuals could have broken molar teeth requiring large restorations in the back of their mouth. Given the increase in stress in this area, amalgam is still considered stronger than directly placed composites. As an alternative, we could place a gold onlay. There is no better restoration in this clinical situation, but the cost would be 4 to 5 times more than amalgam. As a clinician, I am obligated to educate my patients of these choices before I ever pick up a handpiece. In my office, we make every effort to explain the nature of amalgam as well as other restorative materials that we use. We do this by educating the patient of their options, both verbally and through informational brochures. The patient is informed that amalgam is comprised of approximately 50% mercury, that once this restoration is placed, the mercury is stable and bound to the other metals in this restoration, but that a minuscule amount of it will leak over time. However, the patient is informed that despite this leakage, all the credible institutions and organizations that I referenced to earlier have repeatedly stood by its safety. In addition, there is insufficient evidence to assure me or the public that components of alternative restorative materials have fewer potential health effects than dental amalgam. There's an old saying, the dose is in the poison, and there are few of any materials which dentists use that are not toxic at some level. For example, local anesthesia that dentists use are toxic if introduced at a high enough dose. Yet I assure you that my patients are very happy that I use local anesthesia, as I'm sure most of you are when you have dental work done. The important thing here is to know what the toxicity level is, to respect that level, and to adhere to limitations published. Addressing the environmental impact in mercury in dental amalgam is a concern to all of us. To quote a phrase from a 2005 article in the Journal of the American Dental Association, dentists are obligated to be good environmental stewards and should follow practices that reduce environmental mercury release. Amalgam that is used is in pre-encapsulated form. The capsule is sealed and not opened up until after the materials are thoroughly triturated. Handling and proper disposal of amalgam is addressed by the American Dental Association in what it calls its best management practices for amalgam waste. Best management practices addresses all aspects of amalgam disposal, from the collection and proper storage of amalgam particles themselves, to proper disposal of used capsules, to correct disposal of traps that capture amalgam scraps that are flushed out of the mouth. In addition, the use of quaternary ammonium compounds for disinfection, which do not release mercury from amalgam into solution as oxidizing ones do, is encouraged. So in conclusion, I urge you to continue to take the objective scientific approach to the use of dental amalgam that you've had in the past. As healthcare providers and as concerned citizens, my colleagues and I rely on your continued diligent study into this matter. We rely on your guidance for the safety of our patients and for the environment, and we take these responsibilities very seriously. But until such time as amalgam or any other restorative material previously approved for use in this country is determined by credible sources to have detrimental effects on a patient's health and on society, the decision whether or not to place this material should be made by an educated consumer under the guidance of his or her dentist. And I leave you with the words of Hippocrates, the father of medicine. There are, in fact, two things, science and opinion. The former begets knowledge, the latter, ignorance. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mayer. Dr. Marshall.
Thank you. My name is Milton Marshall. I'm here at the request of the American Dental Association to speak on the safety of dental amalgam. They are paying my travel reimbursement expenses, but I received no other compensation from them. I received a PhD in biomedical sciences from the University of Texas Health Science Center in Houston, Graduate School of Biomedical Sciences. I'm also certified in toxicology from the American Board of Toxicology, and I've been certified in general toxicology since 1992. I hold adjunct appointments at the University of Texas Dental Branch in Houston, Texas, and the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston, Texas. I'm currently employed by Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas. My background includes regulatory and safety of product development, drugs, devices, biologics, and combination products. I have experience in both preclinical and clinical safety testing. Key criteria to be considered and associated an effect with exposure are the degree and length of exposure. Now, I would like to emphasize the fact that the form of mercury that's used in dental amalgam is elemental mercury, also referred to as Hg0. Because of the sensitivity of mercury detection instrumentation, volatile or elemental mercury can be measured in exhaled air, and the amount of volatile mercury measured in the oral cavity is increased with chewing in persons with amalgam restorations. The total inhaled dose of mercury is small, though, because of the small volume of the oral cavity, and the amount of volatile mercury released depends on the number of amalgam restorations present. After inhalation, the majority of the mercury vapor diffuses across the alveolar membranes and is retained by the red blood cells in the pulmonary system. The catalase peroxidase system in the red blood cells oxidizes elemental mercury to divalent mercury species that is retained by the red blood cells. Human red blood cells have a half-life of 120 days, and the majority of the red blood cells entrap mercury is excreted in the feces via the biliary system on removal of the red blood cells from the circulation by the liver. Thus, only a small amount of mercury that is not trapped in the red blood cells is available to interact with other tissues. Chronic exposure to elemental mercury is best measured by monitoring urine mercury levels. Occupational exposure to elemental mercury provides the majority of information available on exposure levels that are associated with adverse health effects. Multiple studies have been conducted that correlate elemental mercury levels in air, urinary mercury, and adverse health effects associated with this exposure. From data obtained on the workers in the chlor-alkali industry, a threshold level for subclinical effects was established at 50 micrograms of elemental mercury per gram of creatinine in urine. Although exposure to elemental mercury can be documented by monitoring urinary mercury levels, toxicity occurs at levels far above those seen from persons with amalgam restorations, which typically have 2 to 4 micrograms mercury per gram of creatinine. Although it is good practice to correct mercury levels for creatinine content to account for hydration status, creatinine concentrations in urine is typically 0.5 to 3 grams per liter, and an average value of 1 gram per liter has been reported, which enables a direct extrapolation with values in micrograms per gram creatinine and micrograms per liter. Urinary mercury levels of dentists and dental assistants who are occupationally exposed to mercury from placing and or removing amalgam fillings have shown a steady decrease over time, with the latest 5-year average of urinary mercury levels at or below those in the general population of less than 4 micrograms per mil. Further analysis of urinary mercury levels in dentists who participated in 5 different years of screenings at the annual American Dental Association Health Screening Program indicate a downward trend in urinary mercury over time when the values are averaged from initial to final values. Urinary mercury levels in dentists with both occupational exposure to dental amalgams and to some extent from amalgam restorations are much lower than those seen in persons with occupational exposure in the chlor-alkali industry. I would like to provide an overview of several recent reports on dental amalgam, including one published by the Life Science Research Organization, or LSRO, in 2004. This LSRO report is review and analysis of the literature on the health effects of dental amalgam. For this report, an expert panel was convened to identify and review the scientific literature that was available between January 1st, 1996 and December 2003, and health effects associated with dental amalgam of more than 950 scientific articles reviewed by the expert panel. The quality of literature reports within this time frame were assessed and reviewed to determine if it supported hypotheses relating to adverse health effects associated with dental amalgam. U.S. EPA general assessment factors were considered for determining scientific merit of the literature reviewed. Literature was reviewed for soundness, applicability and utility, clarity and completeness, uncertainty and variability in evaluation and review, independent verification, validation, and peer review. Evidence regarding adverse outcomes in humans was evaluated from the perspective of epidemiological studies, secular trend data, animal toxicity studies, dose-dependent relationships, and biological plausibility. A summary of this report also appeared in toxicology reviews in 2005. The LSRO report expert panel recognized a number of other expert panels that previously reviewed the safety of amalgam for dental use. Overall, the conclusion from these panels was that no adverse health effects were associated with amalgam use other than occasional allergic reactions. In reviewing studies on exposure on elemental mercury and urinary mercury levels, the LSRO panel drew the following conclusions from the literature review. Within the time frame of the review, 1996 to 2003, mean urinary mercury levels in the general population were less than 2 micrograms per liter, and 95% of the individuals in the general population had urinary mercury levels at or below 4 to 5 micrograms per liter. Long-term use of nicotine gum, intense chewing, and more than 20 amalgam surfaces resulted in urinary mercury levels that approached occupational exposure. Two consistent results were seen with occupational exposure: decreased tumor necrosis factor alpha and urine mercury levels greater than or equal to 6 micrograms, and elevated urinary N-acetyl-beta glucosaminidase in the urinary mercury range of 25 micrograms per liter. These observations were deemed to be indicators of elemental mercury exposure, not indication of adverse health effects. Neither occupational exposure nor dental amalgam studies provided sufficient information to support the hypothesis that mercury exposure levels absorbed from amalgam restorations cause an adverse effect on renal function. There was insufficient evidence to support an association with dental amalgam and development of autoimmune diseases. Case reports and studies of immune function demonstrated a localized allergic response in some individuals. Insufficient evidence was published in this time period to support or refute the hypothesis that elemental mercury contributed to adverse pregnancy outcomes. There were some research gaps that were also identified, and several other reports, which I don't have time to go into, also supported these conclusions. So as a toxicologist, my opinion is that the overwhelming body of scientific evidence supports the safety of dental amalgam, and there are no adverse effects in children or in adults after long-term exposures.
Sorry, I'm going to have to interrupt you. Thank you, Dr. Marshall. Ms. Ward?
Yes. Can everybody hear me? Oh, thank you. Can everybody hear me? Okay. I tend to talk too soft. My name is Carol Ward. I'm Vice President of DAMS International, and I'm a retired librarian, reference librarian, library supervisor, and I have 20 years of experience behind me as a coordinator and officer of DAMS. I've heard many scientific lectures on mercury and dental fillings, and more importantly, have spoken to countless individuals who have partly or fully recovered their health from having their amalgam fillings replaced. I'm a survivor of mercury toxicity from my 16 mercury amalgam fillings. At age 45, I became catastrophically ill. For months, no medical doctor could arrive at a diagnosis. I was too weak to walk, too weak to sit up in a chair. Over a period of months, I became a semi-invalid, whereas prior to my breakdown, I had been a jogger and a long-distance hiker. A biochemist nutritionist finally was able to diagnose my condition. He said I was ill from my dental amalgam fillings and that my immune system had been virtually destroyed. When the several medical doctors assessed me and found no damage, I found it rather baffling. But my picture of my illness did fit with many other pictures of amalgam toxicity. I'm going to refer to my fillings as mercury fillings because of their 50% mercury content. I was 7 when the first one was placed, and 43 when the last 2 were placed, and my breakdown was at age 45. I developed systemic yeast and am still on a special diet and will never be able to eat many foods that other people enjoy or have alcoholic beverages. My symptoms included depression, equilibrium problems, repeated infections, dizziness, urinary and kidney infections, digestive disorders, memory loss, low thyroid, and visual field problems. My life was limited for a few months to 1 floor of my home. I was unable to work, drive, or do anything but survive hour by hour, and I know there are many other toxicity victims who've been through this. Following the systematic replacement of mercury fillings by composites by a mercury-free dentist, I began to recover, and I'd like to note that I had Herculite composites put in, and they've been really pretty solidly lasting for 21 years. Following the systematic replacement of these fillings, I began to recover. I was still, however, unable to stand certainly and strongly at an intersection to ballroom dance or play the piano the way I used to, or even get proper rest at night. But the treatment that made all the difference was BAL, British anti-Lewisite. It's in the physician's desk reference, and I understand it's a precursor to DMPS, from what I understand. After 20 days of injections of this, I began to experience equilibrium improvement, intellectual functioning improvement. I could dance, play the piano, and sleep. Since that time, I would say I've achieved about an 80 to 90% recovery. What I lived through from my amalgam fillings was hellish beyond description, and I really hope that there will be others who won't have to live through it because of what we're all doing here. It's time to expose the real nature of these silver dental fillings as an unstable toxic compound which vaporizes constantly in the human mouth. No one is safe from a potentially negative reaction to these fillings because if you don't get sick when you're younger, chances are it may get you when you're older. There is such a wide variety of possibilities. And also, a percentage of the public, 1 to 20%, are unable to excrete mercury efficiently. Speaking of genetics, it is significant that Congresswoman Diane Watson has reintroduced the bill this year, H.R. 4011, and I know you just heard her speak, so you don't need me to go over it again. I'd like to talk a little bit, if I have time, about the children's amalgam studies. DAMS has a position on that. They view that there are flaws in these studies. In particular, during the American Children's Study, despite the reported neurological illnesses, many children were kept in the study. 36 with sensory disorder, 24 had psychological disorders, 19 had asthma, and 4 had neurological disorders. DAMS is wondering why these children were not pulled out of the study to protect them from a known toxin when their health was already compromised. Other weaknesses in the studies are that researchers Drouin and Bellinger focused on statistical averaging so that the damage done to individual children may have been missed. The American Children's Study was based on children, but they may not have been really representative of the general population, as we imagine that children most susceptible to mercury injury from vaccines would have already been screened out. A further question has already been mentioned about the kidney damage to children with amalgam, so I won't go into that. Our conclusion regarding the children's study is based on a vast body of scientific research, is that mercury amalgam fillings are inherently damaging, and children were unwittingly exposed to this damage. Many of the effects may not show up until midlife, the way they did with me. And when then, they may appear as chronic diseases, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, MS, ALS, Parkinson's, and many others. I believe it is the FDA's responsibility to safeguard public health by properly classifying. Thank you.
You have another minute. I just wanted to I was just letting you know you had
okay.
one more minute.
I'm very grateful to have been given the opportunity to speak today. And I think that it's wonderful that you're reviewing all these questions and listening to people from the outside. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Ward. We are actually going to take a break right now. We're at our 2:30 time. We will reconvene in 10 minutes. So please come back and we'll start promptly. Thank you. Get back going with our public testimony. I think our next speaker is Ms. Angela, Dr. Flynn. Finn, I'm sorry, Dr. Finn?
Okay.
Pardon me.
You ready? Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Emmanuel Finn, and I live here in Washington, D.C. area. I must tell you that my position here on this issue has no financial interest, the present or the future. I simply am here to testify in support of amalgam restorations because I do believe that they work, and according to the body of evidence that's out there today, hasn't led me to think and act otherwise. So I'm here to share my own personal and professional experience with this panel and with the audience. And And also, I'm here to represent the Association of State and Territorial Dental Directors, ASTDD. And ASTDD is a national non-profit organization representing the directors and staff of state public health agency programs for oral health in the U.S. It was organized in 1948 and is one of 17 affiliates of the Association of State Health Officials, ASTO. The membership of ASTDD is comprised of the Chief Dental Public Health Officer, which I am here in Washington, D.C., if you may, the State Dental Director of the State Health Department or the equivalent agency. ASTDD membership, ASTD has also established an associate membership which is open to the public. And the organization which I represent today formulates and promotes the establishment of a national dental public health policy and also assists states' dental programs in the development and implementation of programs and policies for prevention of oral diseases. I, and also ASTDD, strongly supports the continued use of amalgam as a restorative material based on the significant body of peer-reviewed, valid scientific evidence which clearly supports amalgam safety and effectiveness, as well as its long history of over 150 years in the dental office. Just as importantly, this issue impacts tremendously on the well-documented access to oral health care issue for marginalized and vulnerable population in our society. I can personally attest to that due to the fact that as a former National Health Service Corps dentist, I'm the dental director of a federal qualified health center in New York State for over 7 years. Now, I'd like to just address a couple issues some speakers have alluded to prior. First, the Honorable Watson, the gentle lady from California, she did state her position quite clearly, and one of the things that she said was that in urban settings, the overabundant use of amalgam is documented. I would also say what I would say to to Honorable Watson if she was here, is that according to the literature, annually well over 1 million amalgam fillings are placed in teeth for the U.S. I can understand that the folks who have testified on the effects of amalgam and the health effects on their personal lives, obviously I do sympathize with them. However, according to the literature, and that's the only thing I could go by today, at this moment, leads me to think otherwise. Again, without taking the personal issues into consideration. I must also tell you, though, that this controversy, it seemed to me, wouldn't be solved today or tomorrow. It would seem this is going to be, it's going to take quite some time for a resolution, if that will ever happen, to come to pass. But I'm encouraged by the fact that panels such as this one, obviously, is critically important in a democratic system to address a critical health issue. In closing, I would just like to say to you to the panel that worldwide, hundreds of millions of patients have amalgam fillings in their teeth. And I don't think this will be abated anytime soon. So I think the discussion obviously will have to continue for some time in the future. And obviously, by all indications, it will continue. But in the meantime, unless the scientific literature says otherwise, I will be in full support of amalgam restoration as a material of choice. And also, there is a cost issue for vulnerable populations, and I'd like to underline that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Finn. Next speaker is Ms. Kilmartin.
I'm Angela Kilmartin, and that's the wrong person, aren't I? Okay. I'm Angela Kilmartin from London, England. I run the British patients group called Patients Against Mercury Amalgams, founded when I couldn't go through the courts and to get revenge. I've been suffering from mercury poisoning since I was 4.5, when my teeth were filled up by a dentist who was paid by the filling. I immediately developed asthma, allergic rhinitis. I had 10 days at school, most terms, and by the time I was in my 50s, my mouth was full of it, plus 4 gold caps. This is about neurotoxicity. I should also say that I've paid my own way here, and no one pays me to come. I believe very strongly in this cause. I'd like to start with some science, because that's what you want, and in a short tour through my office, full of this sort of thing, I find the following. Inhaling mercury will always be a hazard to human health. Neurobehavior effects in occupational chemical exposure. Mercury in the rat hypothalamus after mercury vapor exposure. Detection of mercury in the rat spinal cord and dorsal root ganglia after exposure to mercury vapor. Mercury passes easily through the brain barrier. Look at the dates as well, 1988, and you all have in front of you copies of this, because I shall pass fairly swiftly. Inhalation of mercury vapor associated with tremor, excitability. Chronic exposure has major effects on the central nervous system, and that is from a huge textbook called Toxicology, published by Pergamon Press, and that's the 1991 edition. The electrical charge is transferred to molecular species associated with nerve currents throughout the body. You can see where all the science comes from. Then there's an abnormal neuronal migration with deranged cerebral cortical organization and diffuse white matter astrocytosis of the human fetal brain. That is a major effect of methylmercury poisoning. Electromotive forces and electric currents caused by metallic fillings. Measurement of the electrical conductivity of dental cement, which denies the fact that cement is supposed to separate the various metals. In the Journal of Orthomolecular Medicine, here is a clear connection between the mercury vapor concentration and the number of amalgam surfaces, as can be seen from the reference lines. Scientific studies show that if an individual is exposed to mercury vapor from amalgam fillings through each breath 17,000 times daily, this may result in many different symptoms, complaints, and illnesses. The mercury is quickly received through the lungs and travels through the bloodstream to all organs of the body. This is a picture which is rather stunning. I'm going to go better than that in a minute. These were my neurological symptoms in 1995 when I was aged 54. They are just the neurological symptoms. Every section of my body went under. I was in bed, I had brain fog, I was cold and had to keep going into hot baths, I collapsed regularly, constant crying fits necessitating putting me into a mental home for 2 weeks. Concentration difficulties, fatigue, facial strain, frozen shoulders, and all my bones stopped working, and I was confined to a wheelchair eventually. I gazed, I hyperventilated, I couldn't sleep, I had irregular heartbeats, my legs cramped all day long. I had a memory loss, a metallic taste, skin pallor, tiredness, uncertain gait, and word loss. I think you'll find I'm a bit different now. My stool results after the removal of all amalgam and gold caps in 1995 were sent to Schwara Clinic in Bremen, Germany. Those are the dates. They were 1997. You should be under 3 units per kilo of stool. If you look in the middle of the slide, after an intravenous vitamin C infusion in March 1998, I suddenly started excreting 170 units per kilo of stool. Now, last year, to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the removal of this dreadful stuff and my arisal like a phoenix, I had my stools retested. Look at the difference in the levels from 30s, 50s, 170, I was down to 3.7 and 12, and the 12 units was again after an intravenous vitamin C chelation. This is me 2 weeks ago in Cambridge University. The man on the right is a well-practiced technician, and he looks after the scientific labs throughout the whole of Cambridge University, and I took to him one extracted tooth, which I have saved in a plastic jar. You can examine it, it's on my seat, and one piece of gauze filling, which was put in my mouth during a removal technique. This is the result of the University of Cambridge Health and Safety Division. The Environmental Monitoring Report form gives its location. The date is the 24th of August 2006. The equipment used was a Shore City mercury vapor indicator, which is used throughout the university. The calibration, the last time it was calibrated was the 13th of April 2006, and the method of testing was an ultraviolet photometer. The results. On the morning of Thursday, the 24th of August, 2 samples submitted by myself were monitored for the presence of mercury vapor. The samples were monitored in a well-ventilated room adjacent to the offices of the Health and Safety Division. The temperature in the room within the samples were monitored was approximately 20 degrees Celsius, very comfortable. Sample 1, the extracted tooth, consisted of a gold cap, tooth debris, and residue. And sample 2 was the dental gauze. This is me, and the mercury vapor readings were as follows. When we closed the jar, there was nothing coming out. When we opened the jar and put the probe into the jar, 367 began, and it graded down to 50 on sample 1, and sample 2, just the gauze, was 33 down to 10. Then we sealed the jar, and then we opened it 5 minutes later, and look at the results again, 418 on the initial exposure, and on sample 2, 125. We filmed the whole thing. Don't tell me there's no mercury vapor coming off tooth fillings, even 11-year-old ones.
Sorry to interrupt you. Thank you for your testimony. No, you don't, actually. Oh. Yeah.
It went red.
I forgot to give you the minute warning, but having forgotten, I'll give you a minute.
I have. I'll press it again. The University of Cambridge results came very clearly. Mercury is a neurotoxin, despite what any of the pro-amalgam dentists think. The technician said that if he found those levels from my tooth fillings in a room, he would have the room closed. And the third point, mercury and its compounds can be toxic by inhalation, contact with the skin, that is oral and nasal mucosa, because that's where the vapor is instantly taken up, and of course if swallowed, like the particulate. I have been poisoned. The whole world is being poisoned, but it's to a different effect in every individual. And I seriously hope that you will take note of Congresswoman Watson, because the rest of us down here think that we could just have stayed sitting down. She said it all for us. Thank you very much for hearing me, and it was well worth my visit.
Thank you, Ms. Gilmartin. Ms. Pichet.
Good afternoon. My name is Teresa Pichet. I'm employed by the California Dental Association as the manager of policy development and analysis, and the association did pay my way to this hearing. I'm here today to tell you of the association's support for the continued use of dental amalgam based on the scientific evidence showing it to be an effective dental restorative material, and based on the lack of definitive evidence showing any cause and effect relationship between the mercury in dental amalgam and any systemic illness in either patients or dental health care workers. I'm also here today to support the work done by the FDA, the Public Health Services, and other federal agencies in their ongoing review of research on the human health effects of mercury in all of its many forms. The association in the last 10 or 15 years has faced several challenges regarding dental amalgam in the public policy arena. Representative Watson referred to the dental materials fact sheet. The law she originally wrote many years ago actually required the dental board to distribute a fact sheet to the dentists period. The requirement to distribute a fact sheet to patients did not come into effect until several years later when the law went into effect. The first fact sheet produced by the Dental Board in 1993 actually was a table taken from one of the appendices in the 1993 Public Health Service report. Other areas where we face challenges are with the Department of Toxic Substances Control Mercury Report and Proposition 65, the state's unique law that requires public notification of almost any exposure to potentially hazardous materials. In every instance, CDA relied on the 1993 and 97 reports on dental amalgam produced by the U.S. Public Health Services and the 1999 ATSDR profile on mercury. CDA presented information from these reports at public hearings in order to counter the sensationalized theories about dental amalgam that marked the proceedings. We learned from these reports that mercury toxicity is determined by various factors, such as the form of mercury, route and duration of exposure, and dose. We learned that measuring devices have improved over time and now allow very low levels of mercury to be detected. Most importantly, we learned that the presence of metallic mercury in dental amalgam does not, by itself, mean that dental amalgam has the same human health effects as metallic mercury alone. The work of these federal agencies help CDA make our state's legal and regulatory entities aware that recent, sound, scientific information on the safety of dental amalgam is available and accessible. Dental amalgam continues to have an important role in the oral health of Californians today. Unfortunately, California school children lag behind the nation's school children in visits to the dentist and in the use of sealants, and they have more untreated decay on average. We acknowledge that the use of amalgam has declined with the availability of other durable but more aesthetic materials and with the overall improvement in the nation's oral health. As long as the body of science continues to show that the health benefits of dental amalgam outweigh health risks, the association will continue to support its use. The summary of recent research on mercury, dental amalgam, and human health effects that you are considering at this hearing clearly demonstrate that there is no need to further restrict the use of dental amalgam. The association is appreciative of the time and work this panel has devoted to this subject. I thank you for your attention to my comments today.
Thank you, Ms. Bechet, for your testimony. Next is Ms. Kerger.
Yes, and I thank you for your time. My name is Jessica Kerger, and I have prepared a variety of remarks. The first speech, I think, was 45 minutes long, and I cut it down, and then this morning I threw it out altogether because I thought perhaps if I can even make it a little shorter, you guys could ask me some questions. I think in some ways I have a unique vantage point. But first I'll let you hear a little bit about who I am, and you can decide whether it's worthy of asking me questions. I am somebody who has been diagnosed with mercury toxicity. I've also been diagnosed with mercury allergy and sensitivity. I am somebody who has been declared completely disabled by the Social Security Administration. I am someone who was told by an eminent physician, a man who has over a year waiting list for new patients. This was a man who sat me down and took my hands, looked me in the eyes, and said, "Jessica, I don't think you have 2 years to worry about this mercury thing. I think you don't have that time to spend. You need to get your thoughts together on how to best spend the time you have left. For my honest opinion is that you are dying of a neurodegenerative process. It's a non-specific one. I can't give you a name for it. But I think that's going to explain the further atrophy we see on your MRIs. And it's going to explain the tremors and the seizures and all of the various problems, your memory loss, the inability to concentrate." He said, "You know, I took the time to look up mercury." He said, "And what I found was that the ADA and the FDA say it is safe." I am someone who struggled mightily with chelation when I finally found someone who was willing to help me. If no pain, no gain is the motto there, well, I'm deserving of all of my gains. I am someone who, when I received my APOE genotype tests, was told on a piece of paper in black and white that I had Alzheimer's disease with a greater than 97% specificity. I'm someone who has dramatically improved with the use of glutathione. I think you should all be aware of the glutathione connection with mercury. It has been said in reported literature that glutathione is inversely proportional. Levels of glutathione are inversely proportional to the mercury toxicity. They have a 1-to-1 because you need the glutathione to take it out of the body. I am an attorney, though I haven't practiced in a while and my license is currently inactive. But when I was, I represented clients like General Motors. They were my primary client in Emerson Electric. I was a defense attorney. I grew up in a medical family. I have a great deal of respect for mainstream medicine. My father and all 3 brothers are doctors. So is my stepson, and his wife is about to join them. My uncle is also a medical doctor, a psychiatrist. I am someone who is not unreasonable. When I was an attorney, I was picked to be a juror in a civil case. That's highly unusual. I was picked to be an arbitrator in various matters, as well as a mediator. I think this all makes me an unlikely plaintiff, but a plaintiff I am. I am the plaintiff in a case against the ADA, the Ohio Dental Association, Johnson & Johnson, Dentsply, the manufacturers of dispersible amalgam, which was what was used in my mouth. I may have never figured it out, except that a very fine dentist in my town performed a root canal through an amalgam filling, meaning he drilled right through the center of it. He wasn't trying to hurt me. He believed that that was the appropriate standard of care and that was what to do. But that escalated my neurological problem so greatly that I ended up forgetting my infant son on a changing table and going off and doing something else. I wound up in the hospital within a week with heart problems. Somebody, while I was there, asked me if I had any dental work done. I had said yes, and they said, I think you ought to look into that. I don't know if they were talking about mercury. They were probably talking about the bacterial disease. But what I found when I started looking was just astonishing. I read a book written by a Christian MD who described his experience with chronic fatigue caused by mercury amalgam. He went on to talk about what the ADA had done and how he believed that they weren't telling the full truth and how some people were susceptible. He also went on to describe the treatment and the symptoms that I was having right then regarding hypothyroidism and body temperature. It's like he described me right in this little book. I still wasn't convinced, though. I went to see if I could find corroborating evidence on the internet, and I did. It was all of my symptoms linked in another website by another medical doctor. I went to see that doctor, and he was the first one who told me that I could not return to health without removing my mercury fillings and then trying to get it out of my body. What I'd like you to ask me about is how you are supposed to go about this. If you are told by a doctor that you do have mercury toxicity and you are especially susceptible or hypersensitive, where is the guidance? Where is the corroboration? What is a patient to do? You have a doctor, and then the rest of the establishment, my family, was like, what are you talking about? You know, and then it proved to be the right thing, but it's a very difficult issue because there's just not any agreement out there between the alternative, complementary, and integrative medicine folks and then the mainstream doctors. I think that the answer lies somewhere.
1 minute.
1 minute. You're not going to get to ask me questions. With Dr. Clarkson. Dr. Clarkson, I think you all know, is an expert on mercury toxicity. Back in 1992, he asked, what are the mechanisms of tolerance and defense against mercury? Under what circumstances do these defenses fail? What makes some individuals more resistant than others? The answer to this is key to present and future risk assessments. There is much established literature about hypersensitivity, and I will be putting that in my written statement so that you can see it. Thank you for your time.